is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback. Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's fired. He throws.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Past Our Prime podcast. If you're interested in sports and what was going on 50 years ago, according to Sports Illustrated, you've come to the right place. And you're probably a little bit weird, and that's okay with us. I'm your host, Scott Johnson. You got two buddies of mine, my co-hosts, Bill Mahoney, Mark Hoffman. Over 100 years of TV sports production between the three of us. 95 of those from Mark Hoffman, but still. And
1890, I did the first video.
Guys, on the cover today from half a century ago, The Doctor. And if you love sports like we did back then, you know exactly who I'm talking about, right, Bill?
Oh, gosh, yes. I had an opportunity to meet Dr. J years ago in Las Vegas. You will not meet a nicer, respectful, wonderful man than him. Just as kind as any person I've ever met. Forget being an athlete, and an amazing athlete as he is, and he still is.
What a great memory. You know, sometimes you meet guys like this, especially when it's away from the work we do.
Mm-hmm.
And you're kind of like, all right, I've had this guy up on a pedestal my whole life, and now I'm going to meet him, and when they, surpass what you think of them, that's always just a real treat.
Yeah, because I met Cam Newton the same day, and he was the exact opposite.
Cam Newton?
Yeah, he's the exact opposite from Dr. J.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's not surprising.
Not the warmest, no. Sort of like what?
So you're saying he was a hole that begins with
maybe, yeah. You just, he's a guy that just didn't have time.
Right.
You're at Warren Moon's event, a big bowling event, a lot of athletes there, and he had that look of like, I can't believe I'm here. That's and he I think I still have the interview somewhere. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Bill, you want to have a bowl of cereal with Mark or with?
Sure, why not?
No bowl of cereal.
Take a shower
I'm not eating a
while
bowl
we're
of cereal. I'm not eating a bowl of cereal. By the way, this is the sound that annoys not only you, but my daughter. If I ever ate cereal and I did this, drove her up the wall.
Well, it's all just because mainly we're trying to do a show. And it seems odd that we're actually banging things. And it'd be like me all of a sudden have a power mower. Hey,
I've
been up
since 5. I've been up since 4:45 a.m. I hadn't eaten, so I was trying to scarf down my oatmeal.
You guys cool if I
didn't get it done?
If I do the laundry right now, real quick?
Might as well. No, Mark,
that's a good idea. You know what?
That makes it fun.
I have a load of whites to do. Give me a second.
It makes it fun. I'm just, I just sometimes, no.
Guess that noise on the Past Our Prime podcast.
But Mark, that's what I'm saying. One day we're going to go on and we'll all be on, we'll be on camera and people will see it.
Yeah. And you'll all
and
see
they'll
us
go,
eating cereal.
Why does that one dude keep eating? And who the
By the way,
Amanda?
I don't eat cereal
That's
anymore.
What's going to happen? And eventually Mark's going to be like a millionaire on ESPN, and Scott and I are going to go, it's Past Our Prime podcast with me and Bill.
No, it's breakfast with Past Our Prime.
Breakfast with
What
Mark.
are you having for breakfast?
Yes, like it used to be breakfast with the Beatles.
Can I mention something about the cover?
Sure.
So first of all, the Nets uniforms, those American flag uniforms were so iconic. And I know Brooklyn brought them back for a very short time, I want to say. But, for the most part, they've not used them. And to me, I would bring them back. They're just great uniforms with the blue stars on the side and then the red stripe coming down. It's just great.
I don't remember Dr. J from his ABA days. I vaguely remember him from being on that 76ers team that lost to Portland in 77. And then, of course, he goes up against the Lakers a couple of times when Magic got there. And that's when I really started to know who this Dr. J guy was. So more on Julius Erving in just a bit. But Let's get to the scorecard on this May 17th, 1976 issue of SI, shall we? Billy, this guy sounds like something you would have done back in Little League.
I had the strikeout down to an art when I was in Little League. That and walking a few times. But this is about Kenneth Retief. He's playing for his high school baseball team. He strikes out. Bases loaded, strikes out. But the ball gets past the catcher. Catcher says, "Oh my God, I gotta go get the ball." So he goes and gets it. He races back to the plate to get the guy coming in from third. He fails at that. Then he spins, throws the ball to first base. The ball sails past the first baseman's glove. It rolls all the way to the fence. And before it's recovered and thrown in, everybody scores 4 runs. Retief, grand slam strikeout.
Nice.
There you go. I got to relay one story. This is exactly what happened to me. It's 5-3, and I'm playing right field, surprisingly. The ball comes out to me, pop up. I don't obviously open my glove, so it bounces off my glove. It goes down the line. Before I pick up the ball, I kicked it down the line even more. Then I picked up the ball, and like I had a grenade in my hand, I just threw the ball wildly somewhere. It could have been to the left fielder, and all the runs scored. We lost 6-5.
Mahoney!
That's exact. No, even a friend of mine to this day, when I see him, first thing he says to me is, "Mahoney, what are you doing?" Yeah.
Was
I
that
got
was
that
that
all
was
the way
that
in. All the way.
was that Laguna de Gale?
Dana Point.
Dana Point?
All my teammates were laughing because they knew I was jokester and fun, but I couldn't play worth a darn. So I know how this catcher feels.
You were throwing the ball like lupus.
Yeah, that's the thing. Exactly. Exactly. I thought it could have been a grenade for all I know. If I would have said fire in the hole, it would have been better.
Oh, you and Rocky Blyer.
Holy God, yes, exactly. Minus the heroism.
Be thankful there wasn't social media back then.
If there would have been social media back then, I'd be sitting on some TV show talking about my baseball days.
Oh, that's true.
That is so
America's
funny how,
Funniest Home Videos.
Like coaches now, they would be like, oh, that's Bill out there and he does his best and, we all get a trophy. Back then, they were like, what the hell are you doing?
They did. I mean, they just, man, yeah, they weren't the one to help you get better. And all my friends were all-stars. And then there's me. My lupus out there, but I wasn't so stupid. Maybe, whatever, however you said that.
Your friends were all the Tanner Boyles. Too funny. Mark, let's talk a little Heisman Trophy, shall we?
We shall. Because the very first Heisman Trophy. So first of all, they're talking about how the #1 draft pick in football, has to sign a contract, they hope to turn the franchise around. And back then, the big money was what today would be considered chump change. But anyway, they said every #1 choice had signed except the first one, Jay Berringor of the University of Chicago in 1936. He won the Heisman Trophy, and he had a meeting with George Halas of the Bears in a lobby of the hotel. So Halas asked him what he wanted. He said, "I want $25,000 for 2 years and a no-cut contract." We shook hands and goodbye, and that was it. Never played football. Halas said, $12,500 a year? Are you crazy? And a no cut? What do you think? I made of money?
Right.
No. So I thought, is that an accurate statement? Has it never happened before? And so I did a little bit of research. Well, maybe not a lot of research, but a little bit of research with my friend Wiki. But it turns out, besides Jay Berringwell, who apparently the Eagles also drafted. So I'm not sure how that worked. The Eagles, this would happen. The Eagles traded his rights to the Bears, but he and Halas couldn't agree on a salary. But there also was in 1962, the Washington Redskins drafted Ernie Davis, who was a running back from Syracuse, supposed to be the next Jim Brown. Great player. He was then traded to Cleveland, but he never played it down for Cleveland because he was diagnosed with leukemia and passed away at the age of 23 and never played. And then there was Bo Jackson, who was drafted in 1986 by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But he didn't want to play with them because he said it violated his amateur status in baseball. So he didn't sign, and then a year later gets picked by the Raiders and plays for them. But he never played for Tampa Bay.
Wasn't John Elway part of that as well? Wouldn't play for the Colts?
He wouldn't play for the Colts, so they traded him to the
And he
Broncos.
would play
He
for
did
them.
sign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why Denver was better than Baltimore.
Neither do
but-
I. Neither do I. Looking back,
Maybe he likes skiing.
yeah, maybe.
He claimed that he didn't want to play in cold weather, so he went to Denver.
I
that
don't
makes
want
a lot
to
of
play where
sense.
hot chicks are. Don't send me to San Diego. I mean, come on.
Here on Past Our Prime, we like to occasionally give some advice that might come in handy one day. Case in point, in the event you were ever approached by a gorilla, wildlife photographer Dieter Plage has some advice for you. If a gorilla charges you, counsels Plage, you must stand absolutely still, which is admittedly very difficult, especially the first time. He will charge up to about a foot from your face, scream wildly, and rear upon his legs. However, get this. Now, keep this in mind, guys, okay? You must stand still. This is absolutely vital. If you do not stand still, Page says, well, the moment you run away, the gorilla will come and catch you, and your chances of getting out of the situation are very slim. So, some really good advice from photographer Dieter Plage if a gorilla approaches you, okay?
Well,
So
but just, Scott, think about that. A lot of things in life we learn at one age, and then as we get older, it comes into play. How do we know one day you or Mark may not be on a safari? A gorilla runs at you, and this episode right here, you go, everybody just stand still.
right? You're on the safari with a woman named Ethel,
Yes.
and you're just standing perfectly calm,
Yeah.
as we know that's what you have to
Yes.
do when a gorilla, but not Ethel. Ethel freaks out, runs away. The gorilla goes and grabs her. We never see Ethel again. So Dieter Plage just saved my life.
He did. Exactly. So that's how I like to look at this as a positive. Ethel's gone. She's probably, if she's that dumb to be screaming when a gorilla's in your face, maybe she should read Sports Illustrated from 5/17/1976. She would have saved her life.
God.
Well, you could actually run away from the gorilla if you wanted to. You just to be faster than Ethel.
That's true.
And frankly, if I stood my ground and some gorilla comes within a feet of me and starts screaming and stuff, maybe I survive it, but my pants sure won't. I'm going to need a new pair.
That's
Yeah.
right.
No question.
It's amazing how the gorilla would want your pants.
He definitely wouldn't want what's inside
Yeah,
him.
exactly. That's nuts.
Mark likes to leave a scent.
He wants to find his way home.
Quotes were bold,
They said it. Bill.
Oh, yeah, we're talking about Mike Shaw here. That's the Buffalo Braves PR director talking about Coach Jack Ramsey. He said, Ramsey, he wasn't let go. He's not fired. He's just not rehired.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course.
And that's every coach that ever coached in professional.
That's every
sports,
job in the world that's let someone go.
right? Yeah.
We just
Mark-
don't want you here.
Anymore. But you're not fired.
No. Just take a long vacation. It's like in Office Space. What was it? What's the character's name with the stapler?
Oh,
Who
not Gordon.
Not Gilbert. Is it Gilbert?
Well, we know it's not Gordon or Gilbert. That's good. We've
Yes,
only
we got that. Gilbert.
But anyway, he was fired, but no one wanted to tell him that, so they just kept moving him to a smaller office space.
Yeah. That's classic. Mark, little Gordie Howe action.
I got a little Gordie Howe, and he talked about the conditions of playing in the World Hockey Association. The funny thing is, except for the team going under, our league has never been in better shape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln.
The play was fine.
The play was actually pretty good.
My American cousin.
They never
Yeah.
talked about her. Did she stay or go to the hospital?
She stayed through the Act 2. Yes.
She's all angry, going,
No.
"You bastard! You said you took me out where we're leaving an intermission."
What do you have to say for yourself?
I saw a great documentary about the whole assassination of Lincoln and how, it was so, I know they didn't have the Secret Service like they had, now, but the detail, anyone could have walked up and shot him. It was just horrendous protection and stuff like that. And some think it was a conspiracy.
Yeah. Well,
you never know.
seven people were executed for that.
That's right.
So, And, back then you could walk in the front door of the White House. I got something to say to the president.
That's right. That's right. But remember when Kennedy was shot, that was it Lee Harvey Oswald talked to the media.
Oh yeah.
He used to
I didn't
have
do
him
anything.
talking to the media.
Right. Yeah. How about Frank Broyles saying the University of Arkansas football coach on scheduling, a team that is overscheduled begins to lose. Then it loses its fans, its players, and then its coach. So got to be careful on the overscheduling. You're going to start to lose if you do that. Texas is not a Lone Star team as we get inside the magazine. Frank Lucchesi's Texas Rangers off to a blazing start. They sweep a doubleheader at Fenway, extend their winning streak while leading the AL West early in the season. Surge is fueled by a balanced roster, young hitters like Jeff Burrows and Toby Harrah, couple good pitchers, Bill Singer and Gaylord Perry. Frank wasn't there too long, and as it turns out, it was not a great time for him in Texas.
No, in spring training of 1976, he had a disagreement with one Lenny Randall. And Lenny Randall didn't take to, like, he was upset about his playing time. And Frank Lucchesi said maybe if someone would play harder. That didn't set well with Randall, who proceeded to break his jaw and give him a concussion. So Lucchesi finally gets back on the job, and then they fire him in June. The year before, he had gone 76 and 86, so it wasn't like he was winning the World Series or even making the playoffs. But yeah, they fired him just like 6 months after he got knocked out and had his jaw broken. Thanks.
Yeah.
But no, they didn't fire him. They just didn't bring him back.
Nope.
Yes.
No, he was definitely not fired. He just was not rehired.
Yes.
Yeah, Mark, as Bill mentioned, they're off to a good start here, but it does not end well for the Rangers. And, the Rangers were a bad organization for a long, long time.
Yeah, and I mean, they were in the midst of an 8-game winning streak when this article was written. So, you can understand, why there was a lot of optimism. And for a long time, they were well over 500. I mean, I think their high water mark that year, I think they were like 12 games over 500. I think at one point in July, they were 44 and 32, which makes it pretty remarkable. They finished 76 and 86, 10 games under 500, 14 games behind Kansas City. And they actually had a really long losing streak coming up. They had a bunch of losing streaks, obviously, to get that kind of a record. Yeah, things did go south for them pretty quick.
It's funny how when a player assaults the manager, everything just goes to hell.
Yeah.
Well, what's amazing is I told you they finished 76 and 86, and they won 6 of their last 7 games.
Oh, wow.
So that's just how bad they were for the longest time.
Yeah, bad summer in Texas for sure. I mentioned Jeff Burrows and Toby Harrah, but Billy, there was another guy on that team who led them in home runs.
Yeah, it's our guest. With 20 home runs, Mr. Tom Grieve.
Nice.
Yeah. Tom Grieve, great interview. Those Nolan Ryan stories were phenomenal.
All right, let's move on. In the Rockets' red glare, Reggie Leach erupted for 5 goals in one game to lead the Flyers past the Boston Bruins in the Stanley Cup Finals, a performance compared to the Rocket, Maurice Richard. Reggie Leach, Billy, some people think, he's not in the NHL Hall of Fame, one of the more overlooked stars of those Flyers teams.
Well, just go in the finals. He had 4 goals in the finals, but he scored 19 playoff goals. 19 playoff goals. And I don't know how many, I think they only played like 3 rounds back then, so 19 is quite a bit. What that did for him, and obviously didn't win the Stanley Cup, but he did win the MVP of the whole playoffs, despite the Flyers losing to Montreal in 4 games.
Wow. So that doesn't happen very often, Mark, where the losing guy is the MVP of the series or the Super Bowl. Who was the guy for the Super Bowl that won it for the Cowboys?
Brings back a painful memory for me, but it was Dallas Cowboys linebacker Chuck Halley, who in Super Bowl V was the MVP, a game the Cowboys lost to the Colts 16-13 on Jim O'Brien field goal. A game in which the Cowboys had a 13-6 lead and the ball at the 1-yard line ready to go up 20-6 when Dwayne Thomas fumbled. A game in which I couldn't go to sleep that night because as an 11-year-old kid, it broke my heart. So thanks for bringing up that painful memory.
That hurts.
It doesn't sound like you've slept since then.
I haven't, trust me.
Mark, you take
I
another
haven't.
bite of that cereal and you like it.
It's not cereal, it's oatmeal.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. Sorry. Who was the old Quaker Oats?
Wilford Brimley.
That's it.
Yeah.
He was like 30
Oatmeal
at
is
the
good
time.
for you, especially when you put fruit in it with some nuts.
Yes,
It's great.
Wilford Brimley was like 39 years
Yep.
old when he did those commercials.
Yep.
But he looks 69.
Yep. I think when he did Cocoon, they said he was like 37 years old.
It was a like-hate relationship. This about Bjorn Borg, who's coming into his own 50 years ago, defeating his close friend Guillermo Vilas in the WCT finals, continuing his dominance by winning their 5th matchup in 6 tries. Yeah, Mark, Borg kind of dominated this rivalry.
Well, overall, they met 22 times and Borg won 17. But if you go back and you look at their first 6 meetings, they actually split it 3-3, and then Borg took over. So starting in 75, Borg won 4 times in 75. He won 3 times in 76. He won all 3 times in 77. And he won 78, 79, 80, 80. You get the picture. It wasn't until the Nations Cup in late 1980 that Vilas finally won a match against Borg.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was the last time they played.
In 80?
Yeah, 1980.
And their
They met
friendship
3
stayed
times in 80.
strong.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So at least he ended it with a win.
Vilas
Still,
said
but-
cannot be friends and tennis players too, because they had a strong friendship. They practiced together, they traveled together. Vilas insisted that competition didn't affect their bond. He just made their friendship stronger by always losing to Borg. What a good friend. You need more friends like Guillermo Vilas in your life, that's for sure. There was another guy in our article that we've all heard of course, Arthur Ashe. His career was coming to an end kind of soon, and he loses Billy to a guy by the name of Harold Solomon, who's a interesting guy.
Yeah, Harold Solomon, 5'7" Harold Solomon, upset top-ranked Arthur Ashe, and then he goes on to play Borg and falls to him in 5 sets. But the thing about Solomon, I think I mentioned this a year or so ago, he became known for helping popularize the tennis term bagel, referring to a 6-love set. And then, to make matters better, because this is right up Mark's alley, Solomon would later appear on a list of Playgirl magazine's 10 sexiest men.
Oh, damn, I remember that issue.
Yes. It's a collector's item.
Yeah. And I love how Bill threw in that 5'7" with pride.
Yeah. Shut Nash down, big guy.
Oh. All right, that gets us to the doctor's appointment. The doctor opens up his medicine bag. Julius Erving dominated the 76 ABA finals, carries the Nets to a 3-1 series lead with spectacular all-around play, scoring, rebounding, passing, dunks, you name it, he did it. Spoiler alert, they're going to go on and win this series over those Nuggets. Mark?
Hey, Scott, thanks, man. I didn't know that.
Yes.
Damn it. I have it on tape.
The Titanic sinks.
Oh, no.
Not in my version.
Exactly. They make it to New York.
Yeah.
That's right. Jack and Rose are you in love? They get married,
Yes.
then divorced, then married again, then divorced again.
Mark, this is about to be the end of the glorious days of the ABA.
It is the very last season of the ABA. It is the last title game of the ABA. The Nets beat the Nuggets 4-2. And remarkably, both these teams end up in the NBA the next year. So they have many more rivalries together. Bobby Jones suffered a blister, which kind of derailed Nuggets' only hope of winning. But it was the end of the road, and Dr. J and the Nets win that final ABA title. And I was a big ABA fan as a kid. I really loved that league. I was very sad that it was gone. I was happy that 4 teams got absorbed by the NBA, and the NBA adopted the 3-point shot because of the ABA. But I was very sad to see that league go.
Mark, did you see the thing on Netflix about the ABA?
Yes, I did.
Is it good?
And I also saw the movie with Will Ferrell.
So it's good. I meant to watch that.
Yeah, it's really good because some of those teams, how they survived, and the best teams in the league, like the Rick Barry played on the Oakland Oaks, which was an unbelievable team, but they could only survive like 1 year in Oakland. They had to move.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, Mark, you became a fan of one of those ABA teams.
Yes.
Yes.
Today.
So the only reason why I am a San Antonio Spurs fan is because the franchise was originally the Dallas Chaparrals, and I was a Cowboys fan. Had I been born 10 years later, I probably would have been a Mavericks fan. But when they moved, yeah, when they moved to San Antonio, I kept following them as the Spurs, which is really weird. Because the other rumor was they were going to go to New Jersey, and I don't know if I could follow a team in New Jersey. But anyway,
Yeah, you're
that's just
an anti-Jerseyite.
something like that. And I'm heading to New York this week, so I'm going to get my ass kicked by someone in New Jersey.
Betcha.
Probably.
Did you see the Saturday Night Live skit about ass kicking? It was hilarious with Matt Damon and a couple of cast members. It
No.
was funny. You get a chance, go on YouTube. It's a whole skit of three pseudo tough guys in like Jersey and New York talking about ass kicking, and it's very funny.
Good. I hope you can videotape if you get your ass kicked in New York. Just
Yes,
if a guy comes up to you and starts screaming at you, just stand perfectly still.
That's right.
Don't move.
run.
And then hopefully Ethel will take off running and he'll get her instead.
At that time, when you start running, they just shoot you in the back.
That's
I just
true.
go,
That's true.
is anybody in the park named Ethel? Please, is there someone here named Ethel?
Yeah. Despite limited TV coverage, Erving's delivering massive production, piling up points, highlights, you name it, he did it all. Denver's led by rookie standout David Thompson, who competed hard but struggled to contain Erving's creativity. Everyone struggled to do that back in the day. These two guys had a different way of talking about each other, didn't they, Bill?
Yeah, David Thompson had Dr. J on a pedestal. He says, Julius is the greatest. I have to keep reminding myself not to stop and watch him. But then in game 3, Thompson's called for a charging foul late in the game, wiping out a Denver Nuggets chance to tie it. Larry Brown blasted the call, saying the game was stolen from us. That led Thompson to tears. When Erving heard Thompson had been crying afterward, Dr. J famously replied, he's crying because he missed a shot? I missed a lot of shots my rookie year, but I didn't cry. I just got the rebound and made the next shot. Thanks, Idol.
Yeah. Yeah. That's when we sometimes the word context needs to come into play. You wonder like if Dr. J heard it correctly or if David truly was crying. Lots of questions there.
Well, you also know sometimes that when you read something, you can translate it in your mind any way you want. Dr. J might have just said, wow, crying because he missed a shot? Dang, I missed it. You know what I mean? If you put it in a context where Dr. J, as nice as he was nice to me and a kind to everybody, you couldn't picture him saying something like that with that tone that it seems like he's saying it in.
This is just a typical week on Past Our Prime, and I want to just list some of the names mentioned on today's show. Here we go. Arthur Ashe, Bill Fitch, Sally Little, Dave Kingman, Gordie Howe, Frank Broyles, David Thompson, our cover guy, Julius Erving, Reggie Leach, Guillermo Vilas, Gaylord Perry, K.C. Jones, Jan Stevenson, Harold Solomon, Bobby Clark, Jack Ramsey, Jeff Burrows, Maurice the Rocket Richard, Randy Jones, Frank Lucchesi, Dan Bankhead, Judy Rankin, Toby Hara, Björn Borg, Mike Schmidt, Tom Seaver. It's a who's who of the sports world from 50 years ago, a history lesson, if you will, and nobody, and I mean nobody, knows the history of Sports Illustrated more than our guest. Michael MacCambridge is the author of 8 books, one of the best storytellers in sports writing. From football history to pop culture, his work brings entire eras to life, and his first book, if I'm not mistaken, is called The Franchise, A History of Sports Illustrated Magazine. He is literally the perfect guest for Past Our Prime. And Michael, thanks so much for spending some time with us this morning.
Good to be with you, gentlemen.
Michael, the book is great, and it grabbed me from page 1. You can tell this story better than I can, but right off the top, the story illustrates, no pun intended, how ahead of its time SI was in the world of journalism. Not sports journalism, journalism. I'm talking about the 1967 fight in Houston between Muhammad Ali and Ernie Terrell, and what it took for Sports Illustrated to get that fight into the magazine and the time crunch they were up against. Can you retell that story?
Well, Sports Illustrated was the forerunner in what's called crash closes, late deadlines. And at a time where every other major magazine in the country, Time, Newsweek, Life magazine, needed a number of days before they could process color photography and put it in the issue, SI had brought it down to a science under their mysterious, imperious managing editor, Andre Laguerre, in which a portion of the staff would fly out to Chicago where the actual printing presses were, and they would charter planes to get the photography in and make it work. And then there were certain nights, like this night in 1967, where the weather didn't cooperate. And Laguerre, because he was brilliant and because there was no other choice, always had a backup. In this case, he had an artist who watched the fight on closed circuit and then went back to the offices where they were waiting for the photos to come in and sketched out images of the Muhammad Ali Ernie Terrell fight. And when the flight with the pictures was grounded, that was what wound up going with the story. But most times, SI was able to get like Monday night national championship game in college basketball was on the newsstands Thursday and into readers' mailboxes by Friday. And I think, as you guys have certainly dealt with in the past, in this era of constant streaming video images, it is really difficult to explain to people how rare and how special it was to see late breaking color photographs just a few days later. I remind people that all through the 70s, when Time magazine had color photographs, it was such a special issue that they put it in the table of contents. They'd have international relations, page 14, US, page 21, color, pages 36 and 37. That was it. It was that big of a deal. So SI was very much ahead of its time. And I guess one other thing is, and the corollary to that is, the power of that was so great because in an era when there was one college football game a week on television, and when you almost never got to see, for instance, midweek NBA or NHL playoff games, because that was prime time and sports didn't really enter into that regularly. Seeing those images was the only time you would be able to see certain players and certain teams. And that is certainly the case with this week's cover subject.
Yeah, I mention that all the time about how back then, seeing these people, they were mythical. They were almost not real, these athletes. And Sports Illustrated finally started to make it to where, like, oh, so case in point, that's what Dr. J looks like.
Well, to your point, the word mythic, I believe a case can be made. Julius Erving was the last truly mythic figure in American sports because he was the last athlete to become a certified superstar without people seeing him. Julius Erving was my favorite basketball player in 1976. I'd never seen him play the game. I just saw pictures of him because I was growing up in Kansas City. They had ABA didn't have a national TV contract, so we didn't get to see any Nets games. All I knew was he looked cool and the Nets uniforms were cool and he had a great nickname and the pictures in SI, were just they were like transfixing all of that and then these stories, the myth of Dr. J. By that point we'd had the ABA had the first slam dunk contest during the All-Star game of that season, so earlier in 76. And there was the story about Dr. J running all the way and jumping at the free throw line and dunking. And it was an urban legend because there was no video to support it. There was no YouTube to see it. All you could see were pictures. So anytime you got to see a color photograph of this guy in action, and you'd see it on the playgrounds, kids would be talking about Dr. J, and we never see the guy.
And then to see him on the cover of Sports Illustrated, we
Was
had
a
an
big deal.
opportunity a while back to talk to Bob McAdoo, and he had talked about his whole life. All he ever wanted to do was be on the cover of SI. How important was it in that day, 70s at that time, to be on the cover of SI?
I would say it was the sports analog of the importance for musicians of being on the cover of Rolling Stone, or the importance for political leaders to be on the cover of Time magazine. It was a validation. It was a sense that you were important. And it was also because from the time Laguerre took over in 1960 as the managing editor, he shifted the magazine's focus from being what Dan Jenkins once described as a slick cookbook for the two yacht family to being a news magazine about sports. And so there was the thing that informed the editorial coverage of Sports Illustrated was that sports in itself was worthy, was newsworthy, it was worthy of serious literature, it was worthy of serious investigation, such as Jack Olson's five-part series on the Black athlete in 1968, and the three-part series on the raw deal that was being dispensed to women athletes in 1973. And so Sports Illustrated wasn't like this frivolous sports magazine. It really was a serious news magazine devoted to sports. And that's, I think, one of the things that elevated sports and inspired so many great writers who are still going today.
And when we first started the show, you look back at the Sports Illustrated and go, yeah, let's do it. But then you see everybody on the cover and the many people inside of the stories. Would you say that SI is really a document of sports history or more sports history?
Oh, certainly. I think you could tell a lot about the country and its attitudes by the way things were covered in Sports Illustrated, and by the way that athletes treated the honor of being on the cover.
So we were just talking about the fact that um, there wasn't a lot of TV in the 60s and early 70s covering sports. The ABA was a mystery league. I mean, CBS had a Saturday game on the weekend occasion. Like Will Chamberlain's 100-point game, no video of that.
Mhm.
Um, how important was it for Sports Illustrated to be able to supplement that since there wasn't this video available? And today, let's say Sports Illustrated was starting today, could it succeed because now there's just too much video out there?
I've had this argument with a lot of people for a lot of years. I can remember when I was writing the book on Sports Illustrated, one of the assistant managing editors said, we people know the score today. People know the final score. We don't need to be a news magazine because people know that. And my response was, they knew the final score in 1954. They understood that Roger Bannister won this race or the Yankees won the World Series. One of the things that I think is so important to understanding how Sports Illustrated responded to the video age is that all through the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, the readership studies showed that people were more likely to read a story if they had seen the event on TV 4 days earlier, because SI at its best would tell you something you didn't know, would give you an angle that you couldn't have gotten just from television. Now, in fairness, that started to change in the 80s, and it started when John Walsh showed up as the editor at ESPN and
Mm.
began hiring not just talking heads, but genuine reporters and writers to really cover these topics. And I can remember talking to Michael Wilbon, who then was the Washington Post, had not achieved, pardon the interruption, superstardom just yet. And Michael Wilbon talked about the first times that he went on ESPN on the sports reporters. It changed the way he did his job as a basketball writer. Because suddenly, when he would go into a locker room in Cleveland or Chicago or Detroit, even though players might not know his name, they recognized him from being on TV and they were more likely to talk to him. So, as that's happening, the great writers at Sports Illustrated, and I mentioned some of this in the book, are getting less access. In the 60s, Frank DeFord was invited into the Kentucky locker room at halftime of the 1966 national title game and got to hear Adolph Rupp barking to his players because that was the sort of access he had. Dan Jenkins picked up Frank Broyles at the airport in Arkansas before the 1969 game of the century, Texas-Arkansas, and was driving around with him. He used to get one-on-ones with Jack Nicklaus between rounds of the majors. In the 90s and aughts, that was harder to do. But at its best, it still got done. Take a look at Rick Riley's piece on Tiger Woods' first Masters victory. That thing was covered as extensively as any domestic sports event is covered. And yet when that story came out Thursday, 4 days later, not only because of Riley, but because of the researchers at SI and the relationships they had, there was stuff in there that you just couldn't read anywhere else. And because of that, I think that I had, and I think you gentlemen also had, this sense that a sports event, you could anticipate it, you could watch it, you could talk about it the next day, but it wasn't really over until you read about it 4 days later in Sports Illustrated. That was the last word. That was the thing that put it in context. And as Sports Illustrated has become less and less relevant, I find myself, it's almost like a missing tooth, you know? After a big Super Bowl or a World Series, you're kind of in the back of your mind waiting for the pictures and description and the analysis, and we don't get that anymore.
You know, it's interesting because I remember I interviewed with John Walsh in Century City when he was out there with ESPN in 1990. And the one thing that stood out to me when he was doing the interview was that he said that the thing how he changed it, ESPN or most sports back then we're doing all baseball, then we're going to do all football, then we're going to do all basketball. And he brought that newspaper background to it, where it's like
What's
when
the
you open the
biggest story?
newspaper, right? What is it? You'll see a basketball story, a baseball story, football, all different sports on the front page. And that's what he brought there. And I feel that's what Sports Illustrated did. But on another tangent, it's called Sports Illustrated because it used the photography so much. Talk about the importance of the photographers that work there and how it changed everything.
Well, let's start with the photograph that everybody knows. All I have to say is Ali Liston, the
Mhm.
photograph that was named the best sports photograph of the 20th century, Neil Leifer's shot of Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston. That was the sort of level of artistry that SI had. They not only had Leifer, they had his friend and arch rival Walter Yost Jr.
Mhm.
And I write about this in the franchise. They went back and forth the first four Super Bowls. One year it was Leifer, the next year it was Yost. One year it was Leifer, the next year it was Yost. And I can even remember Walter telling me about, I believe it was Super Bowl II, which was Lombardi's last game as a Packers coach. And he was being carried off the field by his team. And after the game, Neil Leifer came running in and said, I got the cover. I got the cover. Because he knew he'd gotten the perfect shot of Lombardi riding on the Packers' shoulders, and that was going to be it. And so that level of competition was great. But the quality of that sports photography, and it wasn't just those two, although those two were the primary ones. The quality of that sports photography still holds up today. And when you look at old issues, it's still it is still absorbing. I was just paging through the issue in '76 that this podcast is geared to, and some great overhead shots of Erving playing the Nuggets in that command performance in the 1976 ABA Finals. It's not just a stock action shot; it is artistry, and shows some sense of the elevation of how much Dr. J was operating above the rim. The most recent book I wrote was a book about the 1970s called The Big Time, how the decade of the 70s transformed sports in America. And I can remember talking to Hubie Brown, who was coaching the Kentucky Colonels at the time. And he said he realized very soon that he had to order his players. If Dr. J is in the lane, you have to foul him. You cannot let him go up. He said he saw one time Dr. J dunking on Artis Gilmore, who was like one of the best shot blockers in the ABA. And as Hubie described it, here's Dr. J's armpit over Gilmore's face. We can't do that because we'll lose the crowd even if we're at home. So that was the degree to which people respected Dr. J. And those skills were illustrated in those photographs, especially in this issue. It was a terrific set of pictures in this issue.
Well, Mark was just mentioning, because we were all thinking about I think Scott and I are probably thinking the same thing. We had Walter Yos on our show. What made him, I mean, we talked to him. He didn't really want to get into his greatness. He was very much about the photos. What made him so great?
Leifer described it best. I had Leifer and Yos into Austin a couple years ago as the guests of honor for the annual Dan Jenkins Medal for Excellence in Sports Writing, which is sponsored by the University of Texas. So we brought them in, and Leifer put it best. Leifer was like, I always prepared. I always scouted the venue beforehand. I made sure I had backups and enough film and enough flashes. I would scout out the different locations in the stadium or arena, and I would get there early and I would be all prepared. Walter would be out drinking, carousing, come in at the last minute, just, all shambolic, and he would get pictures every bit as good as the one I had. I think it's the classic case of Leifer was the grinder, dedicated, focused, always tried harder, and Walter was the natural. He just had a sense for the image. So it's not surprising at all that Walter did not want to talk about his process because his process was much more intuitive. That shot of Joe Namath after the Super Bowl III win, squirting water into his mouth on the sidelines, that's just, I mean, there's 10,000 photographs of Namath in Super Bowl III, but that one is the one that most clearly points out that in addition to having first guaranteed and then engineered the greatest upset in football history, Joe Namath just looked also freaking cool in the process. So that, there's something there.
Well, then we got to go with that because in Big Time, you wrote about Namath. How did Namath change the way not just men, but women watch sports in the 70s?
I think Namath, like Ali, was one of those revolutionary athletes. And, there had certainly been handsome, good looking football players before. There'd been Paul Hornung, there'd been Frank Gifford, certainly men that would be objectively considered handsome. But there hadn't been sex symbols in pro football before. Nobody, there weren't women fluttering at the sight of Red Grange or Johnny Unitas, for instance. But Joe Namath was a different sort of character altogether. And he winds up in New York City in the 60s at a time of growing freedom for young adults. And he makes the most out of that. I can remember a Dan Jenkins profile of Namath either during or before his rookie season, where Jenkins quotes Namath saying something like, I don't date as just sort of see what I run into, man. So that was kind of Namath's deal. And there is a great NFL Films highlight video of Super Bowl III that the first 6 or 7 minutes is just sheer artistry. It shows Namath in all of his glory and all of these women at games and the Jets Super Bowl parade just looking transfixed like they were seeing Elvis or the Beatles, and then contrast that with these funereal tones and John Unitas backlit in shadow and show this generational shift of Namath coming into his own as Unitas is aging. And it's still one of the best things NFL Films ever did.
Fantastic. As you can tell, Michael is quite the storyteller. Very,
Ooh,
very.
wow.
I mean, I'm
Wow.
supposed to be thinking of my next question, Michael, and
Yeah.
you're just having me transfixed. Um, Author of numerous books, including Chuck Noll, His Life's Work, a biography of legendary Steelers coach Chuck Noll. He did one on Lamar Hunt, A Life in Sports. As Bill mentioned just now, The Big Time, How the '70s Transformed Sports in America, and America's Game, the epic story of how pro football captured a nation, considered one of the definitive histories of pro football. And of course, we're talking about the franchise, The History of Sports Illustrated magazine, today here with Michael MacCambridge. One thing that fascinated me back in the day when Sports Illustrated first started, Michael, was the advertising. When the magazine first started, they were catering to the Ivy Leaguers, the elites, if you will. When did they realize that it was Joe Sixpack who was their intended audience, and how did that change the magazine?
I'm going to take issue with the question a little bit because I think what they realized was not that Joe Sixpack was their target audience, because that had been the fear. That had been why they sought out high class, elite Ivy League advertisers. I think the realization came in the early 60s. And I think the realization was that the actual reader of Sports Illustrated was a successful middle class family man who was upwardly mobile, which contrasted with the stereotype of sports fans at the time. I can remember writing when SI was getting off the ground and they were considering whether or not to start the magazine or not. There was a Time Incorporated executive who said that the only people to read a weekly magazine about sports would be, quote, juveniles or ne'er-do-wells, unquote, because that was sort of the image that sports fans had in the 50s, just as we have today this stereotype of the serious sports fan as the guy who's living in his mom's basement with his card collection. um, in the 50s, the idea of people who would go to sports events were either kids or disreputable gamblers. And I think that Sports Illustrated's genius was they recognized that sports was more serious than that. It wasn't just games. There were things about people's characters and attitudes that were revealed in competition, but that also the people who followed sports were not just losers. They were successful people who had led successful lives, and sports was an important part of the prism through which they viewed the world. And so I do think it was then. It was in the early 60s. There was a memo that Andre Laguerre wrote to the Time Incorporated chief, Henry Luce, in which he said, I think pro football is really our sport. That is the thing that's going to carry us to greater gains. Um, Baseball was something that wasn't as it had been the national pastime for a long time, but it didn't inspire the sort of readership in magazines that pro football did. And of course, the rhythms of pro football were such that you could have the games on Saturday and Sunday. SI would cover them, write about those games. They would show up on newsstands and in mailboxes on Thursday or Friday before the next game. So the rhythms of football were perfectly suited to the publishing frequency of Sports Illustrated. And that, I think, was also crucial.
You just mentioned Henry Luce and Andre Laguerre. Tell me about these two men and their roles in making Sports Illustrated the cultural phenom that it became back in the day. Both being incredible journalists in their own right.
Yeah, Luce was a visionary who, in the 1920s, when he started Time magazine, recognized that there was some value in trying to not merely report but analyze. And so Time magazine was a success in the 20s, and then Fortune and Life launched in the 30s. And people older than me describe Life magazine as being television before there was television, because it was so image driven. And, Time Incorporated was so successful in post war America after all of those successes of Time and Fortune and Life. Luce was looking for something else, and it was a sports magazine that that kept popping up, that idea. And as we discussed earlier, there were some dubious attitudes in the hallways of Time Incorporated about the idea of a sports magazine. But they did launch it, and Sports Illustrated lost money each of its first 10 years. And part of that was they didn't have the editorial focus they needed. Enter Andre Laguerre, this brilliant Frenchman who'd spent part of his time growing up in America, was a big St. Louis Cardinals fan, but was also this serious, scholarly person. Wound up as Charles de Gaulle's press attaché for the Free French during World War II, and later was the Time Incorporated bureau chief in both London and Paris. But he loved sports, loved America, and he comes back to the States in '56 to help this flagging sports magazine. He's elevated to managing editor in 1960. And in addition to just having great journalistic chops, he had this aura, this mystique, and writers would just kill for him. And I can remember talking with Dan Jenkins, and he said that when he got a call from Laguerre, and Laguerre said, Dan, wanted to offer you the opportunity to come to Sports Illustrated and be a senior writer. And Jenkins said, let me think about it for 5 seconds. Okay, yes. And he called his editor, Blackie Sherrod, at the newspaper in Dallas and said, Blackie, I hate to leave you, but the Yankees called. And that was the sense that you were going to the major leagues. You were going to the highest position you could have to cover sports. And so those writers, Jenkins, DeFord, Bud Shrake, Curry Kirkpatrick, they were terrific writers, and they would just open a vein for Laguerre and do some of the best sports writing in the 20th century.
It's funny because you mentioned Curry, and we've had him on the show a bunch of times. In fact, I think 5 times, right? Because he's on
Yeah.
our 5 timer club. But if Andre had not come to Sports Illustrated as a managing editor, I believe 1960, would the
Yeah,
magazine have still taken off, or was he the driving force for why it became this cultural icon?
it's a good question. I'm going to say that, the socioeconomic circumstances probably would have been identified anyway. So the idea of the Sports Illustrated reader as being desirable for advertisers, um, just remember everything you learned watching Mad Men about the desirability of those readers. But the literary component, I don't believe would have gotten there. The idea of this story in the back of the magazine, the bonus piece that was inaugurated by Laguerre, you know, and this speaks to something Scott said earlier about the pervasiveness and the importance of Sports Illustrated. But the Frank DeFord profile of Bobby Knight in whatever year it was, 80, 81, that wound up informing almost everybody else who would write or report on Bobby Knight for the next 20 years, because it was such a perfect encapsulation of who Knight was. And without Laguerre to create a space for that kind of piece, that kind of long form journalism, that kind of, what more contemporaneously we see a Gary Smith or an Alexander Wolf or an S.L. Price do. Um, Without that, you wouldn't have had that literary heft that Sports Illustrated had. James Michener wrote in the 70s that among American magazines, only The New Yorker was better written than Sports Illustrated. So that was Laguerre.
Out of all the writers that they used for these pieces, who stands out to you? You've mentioned some of the names. I mean, George Plimpton also contributed many articles. Who of all those writers stood out to you?
I think it has to be Dan Jenkins. I don't know if the number is still this, but when he left in '84, he had more bylines than anyone in the history of Sports Illustrated. And I think Jenkins was extremely important in elevating the race to number one in college football at a time when there wasn't a playoff, and college football had for much of the 40s and 50s really been this regionalized game. The people back east were all about Harvard, Yale, and they didn't really care much about the Big Ten. The people in the Southeastern Conference weren't concerned with UCLA and USC. And Jenkins sort of made this plea to Laguerre. He said, Andre, there's this thing called number one, and teams spend all season chasing it. We should cover that. And if you go back and look at those SI covers in the 60s, there's probably a half dozen talking about the race for number one, this team or that team. And I think, Herbert Warren Wind had, I think, sort of named the majors in golf, but Jenkins elevated that, and you could tell the way SI covered it and the way Jenkins wrote about it. Those four Grand Slam events developed this gravitas that they really hadn't had in the way they were written about in the 50s. So I think Jenkins was the single most influential writer in the history of SI, and Frank DeFord was a close second.
Michael, every time I listening to you, I think next time I need an air traffic controller because every time I want to go in a different direction, I'm like, okay, no, we got to stay on this. Man, your stories are amazing. But you said that SI lost money for their first 10 years. How are they able to stay afloat? And there's no way in today's age that could happen.
They stayed afloat because I think Henry Luce felt like there was some promise there. Certainly by the time that Laguerre took over, Luce had such faith in Laguerre that when Laguerre said he thought he could fix it, Luce believed him. And then 61, 62, the ad rates start going up, the circulation starts going up. Even though they're losing money, you can tell they're going in the right direction. I mean, and to your point, Bill, it was a more patient, slower paced time. You mentioned earlier about my book about Chuck Noll. Think of the NFL the way it is today and consider that Chuck Noll's first 3 seasons, his record was 12-32. And yet the Steelers kept him on. So yes, I don't believe SI could have survived with 10 years of losses if it started in the 21st century. But it was a different time. And also, Time Incorporated was making so much money off time and life and fortune that it could absorb some of those losses. And so it was just, it was kind of a tax write-off for the accountants at Time Incorporated.
So in this so far, we've talked about photographers, we talked about writers, we've talked about players and stories. What about you? How did you get started on these ideas? What comes through your mind and goes, okay, it's Chuck Noll, okay, it's Lamar Hunt. How do you develop that idea?
Well, with the Sports Illustrated book, I was working in the late 80s as the pop music critic at the Austin American-Statesman.
Mm.
And I interviewed a great writer named Robert Draper, who's now at the New York Times Sunday Magazine. He's written several books, but he just had his first book out, a book on the history of Rolling Stone magazine. And it was a well-written book, had all the characters, Hunter Thompson and people like that, Jan Wenner. But in his acknowledgments, he said that he grew up reading Rolling Stone as his window to the world, his interpreter of world events, the way his parents read Time magazine. And I had this epiphany while reading that because it occurred to me that for better or worse, I had grown up reading Sports Illustrated in the same way. I had gotten a subscription to Sports Illustrated when I was 7 years old. And that's, I learned geography, math, culture from Sports Illustrated, from the pages of Sports Illustrated. And so I can remember Dan Jenkins came through Austin because one of his novels was turned into a movie for HBO. And I did a piece on him and interviewed him because he was one of my heroes. And he spoke about Andre Laguerre with the sort of reverence that Dan Jenkins did not frequently use. And at that moment, I knew there's a story there. So I spent a couple years trying to prove that I was the right person to write the story. I called around, there was there was a feeling in publishing circles that A History of Sports Illustrated was maybe a magazine article, but it probably wasn't a book. And as I talked to some of the staffers, they thought there was a book there, but they weren't sure why the pop music critic in Austin should be the one to write the book. Um, but I talked to a couple people, did a couple sort of freelance articles, and eventually got the job. And I can remember starting to do that and reaching out to interview like some assistant editors at SI, and one of them said, I don't think you're the right person to do this book. You shouldn't be the one to do this book. And I said, well, that may be, but I'm the one with the contract, so I am doing the book. So please talk to me. And they eventually did.
I'm a little, I got to say, I'm a little disappointed in my buddy Bill, because I really thought this was a question he was gonna bring up. But we're talking, these serious journalists, Dan Jenkins, and photographers like Walter Yost and Henry Luce and Andre Laguerre. And then out of nowhere, they come up with this idea of, why don't we do a swimsuit issue?
Yes, yes.
How did that come about?
That came about because you have to remember, into the 60s, the last football game was January 1. That was it, because the NFL championship game was held in late December. You don't have spring training until end of February. Basketball and hockey are not nearly as big of a deal. So there was this decided dead zone, January, February. And at the time, SI was still doing sort of some fashion stuff, still doing some travel stuff. And Laguerre, it was Laguerre again, who went to one of his assistant editors, Julie Campbell, who he knew had a great fashion sense. And he said, what would you think of going someplace beautiful and shooting pretty girls in swimsuits or something like that? And, at the time, again, slower era, the way SI gauged the response to issues was, how much mail did it get? And from the very first, it got a lot of mail. And there were just like ludicrous letters sent in, like accusing SI of pornography. We can see how naive that was from the perspective of 2026. And I think one letter said something like, sex is as dangerous as the atomic bomb. So again, you asked earlier about, what could you tell about a culture from reading the pages of Sports Illustrated? You could definitely tell that the sort of the Puritan remnant that still existed in America in the 60s. But it took off, and it was every year more pages, every year more mail. And it wasn't just hate mail. It was like, we're out here in Minnesota or North Dakota dying for the next swimsuit issue. And then you get, not only, and this is again where the person in charge matters. Julie Campbell, who is, by the way, the subject of a wonderful documentary called Beyond the Gaze, about Julie Campbell in the swimsuit issue. But she had this eye, in the same way that Laguerre had this eye for writing talent. Julie Campbell was able to recognize models who, as she often said, looked like the girl next door, rather than just these vacant, beautiful women. And so there was this emotional connection that readers had with Cheryl Tiegs or Kathy Ireland or whomever it might be. And that made the SI swimsuit issue even bigger than it was. And there was, as it became bigger, it became something that made a model's career. And so suddenly you had more models who were hoping to be in the SI swimsuit issue, and it all took off.
Well, I can tell you, I've never had a girl next door that looked like Kathy Ireland.
It was interesting because you're talking about, you started subscribing as a 7-year-old, and what people don't understand is there's no internet or anything. What you're doing as a kid, and we all did this, is you're waiting for that one day a week when that Sports Illustrated is going to be delivered in the mail, and you open it up and you get it, and then you start reading it. Can you describe that experience to people or young people that don't get the concept of that?
Yeah, I was a latchkey kid because my mom was a nurse and would work until 3:30 or 4, and I would get home before that. But I was a latchkey kid with two keys, apartment key, mailbox key, because
Mhm.
I could not wait the 30 or 45 minutes before my mom got home. And, you were always wishing for Thursday, but if it wasn't there Thursday, certainly Friday, the end of the school week, you come home and I would just have a meltdown if it wasn't in Friday's issue. And a time or two actually went out to a newsstand on Saturday because I just couldn't bear not having it, going into the weekend. So yes, it was huge. And there were other sports publications out there. There was Sport Magazine, as you guys I'm sure remember in the 70s, which was stylish, but much more a feature magazine, long deadlines, profiles, um, previews written months before the season started. And then there was the Sporting News, which was just a newspaper compendium of box scores and
Mhm.
local writers. It was absorbing if you loved statistics, and it was kind of fun in retrospect because it tried to be a serious newspaper with an op-ed page and an editorial page about sports, but it lacked the seriousness, it lacked the writing chops, and it certainly lacked the photography that Sports Illustrated had. But it was another way to monitor the world of sports.
Um, we were talking about all the writers that had appeared in Sports Illustrated, and so we do a trivia segment here on the show. And I need to ask this question to set up the trivia for you. It's a 50% chance of getting it right, A or B,
I'll,
true or false.
I'll surely get it wrong. Go ahead.
Okay, so out of a lot of the writers, I found George Plimpton the most interesting because he would dabble in sports, but he did a bunch of stuff. He wasn't
Yeah.
really a sports writer. Talk about his impact, and then I have a trivia question off of that.
Um, Plimpton was the regular everyman, if the regular everyman had been educated in the Ivy League. But he was very much this idea of what is it that's so fascinating about sports? What would it be like to be a quarterback? What would it be like to be a goalkeeper? What would it be like to be a pitcher? And so, because sports was so much smaller then, he was able to talk his way onto the preseason roster of the Detroit Lions
Mhm.
or into an all-star game or into an exhibition game with the Boston Bruins, and then wrote about that thing that, today we would probably, I suppose the equivalent would be, what would it be like if you had just a normal, regular sized human being in the Madden game? How disastrous would that be if you had just a mere 40-year-old mortal in at quarterback in Madden? But Plimpton would write about this and just sort of write about all the things that athletes wouldn't think of, but that regular people would think of. What's it like in the locker room? What is it like when you get taped up? How do you move when you've got all these pads on your thighs and your knees and your shoulders? And so there was just a real fascination with that. And in addition to those participatory things, he was also wonderful at writing about scenes, going to a Muhammad Ali fight and writing about all the things that were going on in the hotel the days leading up to the fight, at the venue, that sort of thing. Plimpton was very, very adept at the larger cultural motion going on.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the trying out for the Lions, which became Paper Lion, which was a book and then a movie. And he also tried out for the Colts a few years after that, or in an exhibition game.
Yes.
But I think he tried to dabble in other areas too. So here's your trivia question: True or false? In one of these "What's it like" moments, George Plimpton actually appeared in a movie with John Wayne.
Could be true. I don't know that it's true, but it could be true. It would not surprise me. Tell us.
It is true because it was what is it like to be a stuntman on a John Wayne film? And it
Okay.
was Rio Lobo and he played sort of a bad guy. He was like the fourth bad guy. And the thing that he described, he was so disappointed because he doesn't get killed by John Wayne. He gets killed by this Mexican actor they brought in. It was only a second film, who was like in pink underwear when he shoots them, and he said it was so disappointing.
That reminds me that there's a Bruce Springsteen song on the Western Stars album where he's a stuntman whose claim to fame was he got shot by John Wayne once. So
Wow.
Yep.
what goes around comes
Oh.
around.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, Michael, I'm bringing it all the way back to the beginning. We're
Mhm.
wrapping it up with you, at least for me. You described Dr. J as being the last mythical figure. How do you explain Dr. J to kids nowadays that have no ability, maybe sometimes, to think there was a past?
I think there was a degree of both athleticism, but also artistry in the way Dr. J carried himself. And certainly in the ABA, the offenses were less structured than they were in the NBA at the same era. And so there was this sense of somebody bringing playground creativity to the structured professional game. And there were also, there's the 3-point line in the ABA before the NBA had it. There were slightly different rules, which certainly helped make the game more creative and more exciting. In the same way that the American Football League in the '60s had more passing and more wide open offenses than the NFL did in the Lombardi-dominated '60s. And so Erving was ahead of his time at a time when the NBA was largely still 6'10" to 7'2" centers playing a low post game with their back to the basket. Erving was much more of this hybrid character who could both bring the ball down the floor and also go into the paint. And he was certainly kind of the future of basketball, what it is today, positionless basketball. That's what Julius Erving was in 1976. And everybody from the ABA I've talked to makes a distinct point that by the time he got to the NBA, it was different. He was not the same. His knees weren't the same. He didn't elevate as much. He was more in the structure of the Sixers. You didn't get to see the full unfettered Dr. J unless you were there in Uniondale, New York at the Nassau Coliseum or in San Antonio or Denver, Indiana in the ABA days.
And if we didn't get to see Dr. J at his best, boy, he must have been something.
Yeah.
Looking back, Michael, Sports Illustrated it's a shadow of what it used to be. It's no longer really relevant in today's sports world, not the way it was, that's for sure. When did it peak, and what will its lasting legacy be?
I think if you go back to the fall of 1975, you've got the Thrilla in Manila. You've got that great Red Sox series. You've got some of the thickest magazines, some of the thickest issues in the history of the magazine. That period in certainly the first half of the '70s, and I'm biased because that's when I started reading the magazine, but they were accomplishing things on a weekly basis that still sort of boggle the mind. That I think was one of the first golden eras. And then again, the magazine, even into the 21st century, could still get a lot of important things right. But as we discussed earlier, I think as ESPN's profile increased, SI sort of diminished by comparison. And I think that there's just no way to recapture that today because you don't have the brilliance of a Laguerre, you don't have the deep pockets of Henry Luce and Time Incorporated, and as a monthly, it's just another magazine. You might as well read it online, and they don't have any staff photographers anymore. So to Mark's point, there's not the the photographic excellence on a regular basis that we became accustomed to in the 70s and 80s. It's not a news magazine about sports. And because there is no news magazine about sports, there is a void in sports coverage. And, I read ESPN, I read The Athletic, I read The Ringer, I read all of those online sources, but there's still something about paper and ink and the idea of every week saying, this is the most important news event. This is the second most important news event. Here's what's going on behind the scenes in scorecard. Here's a feature, an in-depth look at somebody that you haven't really thought about much. Here in the departments in the back is somebody who's coming up that is sort of on the periphery now, but that you might want to know about later. There is this complex series of elements that was part of Sports Illustrated in its prime, and we don't have that anymore. And sports is lesser for it. And the example I cite, and this is heartbreaking, but it's sort of human nature. After the national championship game in college football, the next morning on the front of ESPN.com, there will be two stories. One will be an in-depth look at how the national champion won that national championship game. It will be some simulation, some similarity to the big lead story that was in Sports Illustrated every year. There will be another story that is much more superficial called Way Too Early Top 25 for next year. Mm-hmm. And that story is going to be much more read than the in-depth story on how the national championship was won. So at the end of the day, if the games don't matter, then it's all just spinning forward to what's next. It's all just sort of this massive poly market simulation of who's going to win next, what's going to happen next. And there's so much more to sports than just what's going to happen next. And I think we've lost that attention to the games, how the games are won, why the games are won, what is revealed in the crucible of pressure. We have lost some of that as Sports Illustrated has declined.
Well said. Very well said. We've lost so much, I think. Michael, you had a quote in your book that resonated with me from Stephen Chapman of the Chicago Tribune back in 1984. He wrote, "A century from now, when scholars want to learn how Americans lived in our time, they'll turn to Sports Illustrated." Well, we couldn't wait 100 years, so we did it in half a century. Past our prime, we look back at sports from 50 years ago, and let me tell you, your book is just fantastic. The Franchise, A History of Sports Illustrated magazine by Michael MacCambridge. Michael, I just can't tell you how much we enjoyed our hour with you. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed it as well. Thanks so much, guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rookie cards of baseball, basketball, and football stars are iconic pieces of American history, and they have been outstanding investments over the last 50 years. Now, key issues of Sports Illustrated, professionally graded and encapsulated by CGC, have emerged as an exciting alternative to trading cards. ThePit.com is the leading online exchange for investment-grade sports magazines. General Manager Mark Humphreys offers Sports Illustrated first cover editions featuring stars like Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, Derek Jeter, Ken Griffey Jr., and so many more. The CEO of ThePit.com is Mark Humphreys, an expert in the value of graded covers of Sports Illustrated. And Mark, when you are talking 1970 sports, it does not get bigger than Julius Erving, Dr. J.
Yeah, well, he's the person who is most responsible for the merger of the ABA, or at least some of the ABA teams into the NBA at the end of 1976. So this cover, which I have here in graded form at kind of a mid-grade level of 7.5, Dr. J slices them up. He's ripping the Denver Nuggets, whose descendants are in the playoffs right now. This is Julius Erving's second cover on Sports Illustrated, and Erving is very collectible in the sports memorabilia world. People love his cards and also his magazines. His first cover from 1974 is fabulous. It's a very low perspective shot of Erving jumping amongst several other players, and the cover headline is "What's Up, Doc?" Which I think was echoing the Barbra Streisand movie of a little bit earlier in that era. But this one, his second cover, shows how the ABA was gaining traction. It had been a very struggling league at first, but then it got it had Erving, who was the most spectacular basketball player of the time, and because of his popularity, well, let me say, without his popularity, it's possible that the NBA never would have needed to acquire the ABA. He and a few other players really brought that league into a break-even state first, and then enough popularity to drive a merger during a time when basketball generally just wasn't very profitable. They didn't have big TV agreements, even for the NBA. So at the end of 1976, there's another Sports Illustrated cover that we'll show when we get to it, but that one was announcing the merger of the ABA and the NBA, and again, Erving was on the cover, this time with Dave Cowens of the Boston Celtics, so a representative from each of the leagues that were then merging. And basketball players are very collectible, but the most collectible of basketball players are the ones who not only were great players, but were also spectacular. And I think that goes back to Elgin Baylor, and then through Julius Erving. David Thompson is a guy who would be featured there, and even more prominently if he hadn't had some tough injuries. And then, of course, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Vince Carter, and up to the stars of today. The guys who were the Skywalkers, the great dunkers, and even more than the centers, because people could still kind of identify with a guy 6'6", who went through traffic of larger people and got to the hoop in a spectacular way. And no one was more spectacular than Julius Erving. This one is probably about a $300 item, and there have been 15 graded, which shows that collectors are very interested. There have even been 14 subscription issues graded. And when subscription issues are graded, because they're less valuable, you know that collectors are really interested. What it basically means is, hey, I can't afford a newsstand edition, again, an issue without the mailing label, but I love this issue so much that I'm willing to accept a copy in my collection that has usually someone else's name plastered on it with a fairly ugly mailing label. And these are very rare in top grade. Of the 15 newsstand editions, the highest graded one is a 9.2 on a 10-point scale. And that one is actually autographed according to the census or population report. So that 9.2 autographed, that would definitely be a four-figure item if it ever came to auction. And depending on how interested the bidders would be, could even get to the mid four figures, I would say.
Only thepit.com offers competitive buy now and sell now quotes on graded magazines online, as well as many of the most popular modern PSA graded rookie cards, including Shohei Ohtani, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Nikola Jokic, and Steph Curry. Trade sports stars like stocks at thepit.com. Mark, now time for a little bit of an advertisement. I gotta imagine that you're going to do something on oatmeal since it's been in the show since we started today.
Well, yeah, there are nuts involved though. This is an ad for jockey underwear, and they have these athletes, 9 athletes from different sports, all posing in jockey underwear. And I mean, like Fred Dreyer, pre-acting 100 Days, has shoulder pads on and jockeys, and that's it. And he has a beard, which looks so different with the beard. Craig Morton has literally almost nothing on. It's like, really? Lou Brock, Steve Garvey. At least Steve has a tank top on. I mean, Craig Morton had nothing on.
I guess I missed that ad.
Yes, you and me both, Bill.
I just
went right to the gorilla story. But
yeah. Now, if it was girls in bikinis, I probably saw that one. Oh yeah, she's drinking.
Well, you
something.
were talking about Playgirl magazine. So
that's true. That goes with that.
But yeah, it's but you know, they're all separately taken. They weren't in the same room together. That would have been interesting.
That would have been.
But one of them, the hockey player Brad Park,
Yep,
you know,
yep.
like the other guys look muscular. He kind of looks a little like, and he's a hockey player, you know, but he kind of looks a little wimpy in the picture. But
well,
I
if you ever see him, tell him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that to his face.
Yeah. You looked a little wimpy in those.
You look like a puss, Park.
But they had like Ed Marinero, a couple of them actors. Like have Ed Marinero and Fred Dreyer, both become actors. You know, Jim McMillan, Craig Morton, Steve Garvey, Lou Brock, Brad Park.
Well, Bill, you'll have to go back and look at that.
I will. I can't
Terry
wait.
Metcalf.
I can't wait.
Maybe
some guy
print it
wearing
out.
bun huggers. Do they still call them bun huggers?
Well, you just did.
I did, yeah. So it's still around.
Bowed but never bloodied. In Japanese baseball, managers sometimes take a temporary leave called a kyuyo.
Yep.
Easy for you to say. To accept responsibility for poor performance, framed as a rest rather than a firing, which you're not fired, you're not rehired, you're just going away.
Yeah.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah.
But it preserves honor and team cohesion. Case in point, 1962 Hawks manager Kazuto Tsuruoka shows how this works. His voluntary step down shocked players, but sparked improving play. He went on a little hiatus, and the team went on an 11-game win streak that led to his eventual reinstatement. So very interesting how Japanese baseball treated their managers, or just the sport in general. It has a lot of that in their culture, of that self-responsibility, and how they were so devoted to the success of the organization, right, Bill?
Yeah, you know, if you look at even the interim manager, who helped them on that 11-game winning streak said, Tsuruoka's got to come back. He's just a better leader than me, and they need him. I mean, how many times you'd see any interim manager with getting their opportunity say that in the States, but in Japan, boy, they do that. The manager does not only leads the team, he's part of their lives as well.
I think George Steinbrenner should have adopted this policy. Just, you know, met with Billy Martin and said, I think you should take a little bit of a leave, a rest. You can come back in a year, because that's how it worked out. You know,
Yeah.
It was never a permanent firing.
And I tell you, you know, I remember back 50 years ago or so, and just discounting Japanese baseball altogether. Be like, yeah, I'm sure they're fine, but you know, double A compared to the US. But man, you look at the players now in Major League Baseball from Japan, and you could field an all-star team of guys that are Japanese. You know, Shohei, of course, and Yamamoto with the Dodgers, but as you mentioned, Suzuki with the Cubs, Murakami with the White Sox, Okamoto with the Blue Jays. They are a serious baseball country, no question about it.
I was thinking about when I was a kid, remember Sudahara O?
Yeah.
He said, he wouldn't hit for power in the major leagues. Now you realize he probably would have been pretty doggone good if he played in the majors, had that opportunity.
Absolutely.
Because he didn't get that opportunity back in the day.
No. More baseball. He stoops to low tricks. Randy Jones is a highly efficient, control-focused pitcher who relies on low-speed sinker ball to generate groundouts rather than strikeouts, frustrating opposing hitters with his precision. When I say highly efficient and control-focused, relying on low speed, how slow was it, Bill?
His fastball was clocked at 73 miles per hour.
I could taste that.
That's not much faster than guys that go to those little pitching things at ballparks.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. After he's in 74, he's 8-22, but he rebounds under a pitching coach by the name of Tom Morgan and leads the league in ERA in 1975, 2.24, finishing near the top in Cy Young voting. And this year marked even better for him in 76. But then, after 75 and 76, Randy steps off a cliff, doesn't he, Mark?
Yeah, so 75 and 76, he was ungodly. He combined for 42 wins in that 2 seasons and 26 losses. His combined ERA was about 2.5 runs, 2-time All-Star, Cy Young Award winner in 76. But he finished his career with 100 wins and 123 losses. So if you take everything else out, he had 58 wins and 97 losses in those other years that weren't 75 or 76. That's a bad pitcher.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes, it is, no question about it. And I don't know the other numbers, but those Padres teams were also horrible back then. So the fact that, because he does win the Cy Young Award here in 76, I believe.
No, 75 and 76 was great. You just have to go starting in 77.
Yeah.
But you wonder, what is it? It was Tom Morgan still his pitching coach. And what did he say to him after he lost 22 games to make that type of turnaround? I mean, what could he change?
Well, here's what happened, okay? His last start in 1976, he injured a nerve in his pitching arm.
Okay.
It needed surgery, and after that, he just was never the same.
Okay, there you go.
So that explains it. I mean, he was the following year, I think he was, or when he started pitching it, he was 6-12, and his ERA was over 4.5. So, but he did have a game against one of our prior guests, Jim Cott, where it was against the Phillies. It was the fastest game in Padre history. You ready for this? The game took 1 hour and 29 minutes.
Holy smokes.
Man.
There was one game he only threw 68 pitches.
In a complete game.
Yeah, in 1 hour, 44 minutes, complete game, 68 pitches. If it means anything, Reed Detmers pitched the other day. He pitched 3 innings, threw 99 pitches. I mean, man.
These guys back then, it wasn't about throwing 99. It was 91 in location and moving the ball around. Randy Jones, in fact, says, the thing is, if you throw it too hard, it doesn't sink. So my purpose actually is not to throw hard.
Yeah.
Imagine that. I still think that there's room in baseball for these kind of guys that
I do too.
know how to pitch and hit their spots. Reed Detmers, yes, I suppose, he's got electric stuff, and he might give you 6 good innings, as they say now.
Yeah.
But, man, I wonder if he dialed it back and averaged 94, but actually could throw a strike, how effective he'd be.
That's true. That's true. It's too bad that Randy Jones passed away recently. He would have been a great guest.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And I heard he was
a
really nice man.
Yeah.
Speaking of passing away, I know there was a death of an icon in baseball this past week, and he was featured in the magazine. Ted Turner.
Yep, Ted did. Ted passed away this week. What an innovator with the creating the superstations, his sports ownership, of the Braves. I think he owned the Atlanta Flames too, I want to say, and the Hawks at one time. But just a true innovator and a sailor. He won the America's Cup.
That's right. We used to do the boats on him.
Yep.
Right. But so the team was really bad in 76. So he was promising to pay each player $500 for every win over 81 that season.
Yeah.
Do you think it worked?
No.
I think
they won 70 games that year.
How he became a billionaire.
Exactly. I said, I'll offer all this money knowing I'll never have to pay it.
He also at one point fired a manager and managed one game as the Braves manager.
That's right.
In a season. I forget if it's this season or it's coming up. Might be 77, but yeah, they went 0-1.
Well,
He kind of turned that franchise around by the time he sold them, and the Braves have been a model of consistency.
They've not looked back for 20, 30 years.
30, 40 years now.
Yep.
They were pretty bad at this time. In the 70s, they were pretty bad, but they have been, right up there with the Dodgers and Yankees the last 30, 40 years.
Well, I remember they were laughingstock of baseball, and then they weren't. What did they win? 12 straight NL West titles in a row?
Yeah.
I mean, they were the model of consistency. But in the 70s, in 76, they won 70 games. In 77, 61 games. In 78, 69 games. In 79, 66 games. That's bad. That's over 90 losses every year.
Yeah. Yep.
101 in 77.
All right. Sally Little won the Women's International in dramatic fashion, holding an 80-foot bunker shot for birdie on the final hole to edge Jan Stevenson by one stroke. Bill, the beginning of a great career for Sally Little.
Yeah, that was her first ever victory in 1976. She'd go on to win 15 more tournaments and 2 major championships.
And beating Jan Stevenson, who we all knew from back in the day.
Yeah, that's right.
The tournament reflected the rapid growth and commercialization of the LPGA, which was evolving from its modest beginnings into a more polished international kind of high-stakes tour event. And people like Sally Little and Jan Stevenson have a lot to do with their success now 50 years later. Anything else before we get to For the Record?
I'll give you something. It's called the Rover Boys. Just because I don't know how people find their skill in this, there was a guy named Jack Abernathy. What he would do is he'd catch wolves with his bare hands. He'd shove his hand into a wolf's mouth, grabbing the lower jaw and wrestling the animal to the ground. I don't know why. I have no idea how you wake up one day and go, this is what I'm going to do. But Jack Abernathy did just that.
You know who else did that? Bill Abernathy. He just wasn't that good at it, and so we don't know anything. We don't know anything about how does you just wonder, like, these things where like you're like, you know what I'm gonna do? You see that wolf over there?
Exactly.
I'm gonna approach him, and I'm gonna just grab him by the jaw. And his friends are like, I think that's a good idea, Jack. Oh. My goodness. Some people crazy. For the record, Mark, we spoke earlier about the first ever Heisman Trophy winner. What about the first and only 2-time Heisman Trophy winner?
That would be Archie Griffin from the Ohio State. And he gets drafted by his home state. The Cincinnati Bengals draft him, and they sign him to a 5-year, $500,000 deal. Oh my God, $100,000 a year. Back then, that was an incredible amount of money. But he played for the Bengals, but he only had, I think, like 2,800 yards rushing. I think he had 7 touchdowns. His career never really took off. What's interesting is that the Bengals also drafted his teammate, Pete Johnson, who was more of a fullback. And Pete was like the short yardage back. He scored a lot of touchdowns for the Bengals. I remember Pete Johnson. He ended up having a better career than Archie.
And didn't the Bengals also draft Griffith's brother, I think, as a defensive back? And I think he had actually a better career than Archie.
Yeah, I mean, it's sometimes it's the team you play. I knew a guy who got drafted by the Detroit Pistons back when they weren't very good, and that really hampered his career. He was a first-round pick. If he had been drafted by a better organization, he might have had a longer NBA career.
This next guy, if I ask the trivia question, who's the first, who broke the color barrier? It's not even a trivia question, right? Jackie Robinson, first black player. And if I said who broke the color barrier in the American League, some people might have to go a little bit before they got to Larry Doby.
We know that.
But if I said who was the first black pitcher to break the color barrier, I guarantee you nobody would know that. Billy, we should know more about this guy, Dan Bankhead, who passed away 50 years ago.
Yeah.
I was going to say Satchel Paige.
And what was it? But what was the team that he pitched for?
I want to say Kansas City, but I don't know why.
Dodgers.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And also, he was a great hitter in the Negro Leagues. When he came to the Dodgers, he homered in his very first major league at bat. So Dan Bankhead is a guy that's sort of lost in the shuffle, but he'd be an interesting one to learn more about.
For sure.
Because he had to go through some headache as well.
Mark, you would have thought it would have been Satchel, and he probably is up there pretty soon, or high up there. But
Satchel pitched at nearly 50, didn't he? He'd be the oldest.
Yeah, he was old. He was old when he pitched.
Yeah.
We mentioned last week, I think, that the Bullets lost to the Warriors in the finals in '75. This year they lose to the Cavs. So a couple of disappointing seasons, and what their coach was not rehired at the end of the season. K.C. Jones fired by the Bullets. In 3 years there, he was 155 and 91. 1983, K.C. takes over as head coach of the Celtics, replacing Bill Fitch, guides the Larry Bird-led Celtics to championships in 84 and 86. Celtics won the Atlantic Division in all 5 of his seasons as head coach and reached the NBA Finals in 4 of his 5 years as a coach. In a surprise announcement, he retires following the 87-88 season. He was also, I think, on the San Francisco team with Bill Russell in college. So an amazing basketball career for K.C. Jones, who died in 2020 at the age of 88 years old. And man, he's another one of those guys. If you grew up here in LA and you liked those Lakers teams, that meant that you hated those Celtics teams. And, you didn't really hate them. You just thought you did. But because now I look back at Larry Bird and McHale, and I look at them with reverence and respect and how good they were. And K.C. Jones was the guy on the bench there leading those teams. Boy,
I remember
He
Casey.
was so stoic.
Yep, that's correct. Faces in the crowd. Mark, who's Todd Bell?
Yeah, he's a 17-year-old from Ohio, and he just set the long jump record. In fact, he broke Jesse Owens' record. That's how good he was. It was like 24, 11 and change. But his background story is really kind of fascinating because he was a track star, but he was a good football player too. He played on the Buckeyes football team. He was drafted in the NFL in the 4th round. He played for the Bears and the Eagles between 81 and 89. He was actually in 84 a second-team All-Pro safety. He made the Pro Bowl in 84 also. Had 7 interceptions in his career and 10 sacks and 8 fumble recoveries. So he had a pretty good, decent football career. But alas, when I talk about people, and this from my, from my history, the ending is a little bit sad, okay?
Uh-oh.
So, yep. I'm afraid, how do I say this as gently as possible?
He's dead.
Yes, he is dead. And I shouldn't be laughing at something like this because he was only 46 years old. On March 6, 2005, he had a fatal heart attack while driving a car.
Yeah.
And what's so weird because you think about it, this is this athlete, this track and football guy, yet in his 40s, he dies of a heart attack, which tells you about genetics and how people sometimes treat themselves when their playing days are over.
Yep.
I don't know which was the case here because there's a picture of him after his playing days and he still looks like he's in good shape. So it could be more of a hereditary thing.
Could be. It's probably why Mark is eating oatmeal.
Yeah.
That's damn straight. I could have been a victim 10 years ago.
Right.
Yep.
With fruit and
That's
nuts.
Bill, Brian Hardy, is he alive?
He is not. And I don't have as much background information on Brian Hardy. I apologize, Mark. But he is the brother.
You suck.
Yes. He is the brother of NFL player Bruce Hardy, who was on a magazine, I think, was it last year or this year? He started in 3 sports, Brian did, over at Utah. But he was later drafted by the Cubs and spent 3 seasons in their organization.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe Bruce Hardy is along with Hale Irwin, one of those guys that we basically did everything but show up at the guy's front door to try and convince them to come on the show.
They're still going to call back.
Yeah, Bruce had a nice little long NFL career there. Yeah. And I want to say caught like the 100th touchdown pass of Dan Marino's career or something like that. 19th hole. This is our grumpy old men's section, and Pete Morris is going to fill the bill on that one, right, Bill?
Yeah. I'm going to try to get the emotion that Pete Morris.
All right, good.
Here we go. We readers remember what you write. Take, for example, the scouting report on the new baseball season. Pitching is a Texas Rangers shortcoming, and Frank Lucchese is foolishly counting on Bill Singer and Nelson Briles, and Gaylord Perry is a rusting 37. Remember? The Rangers are now 9-4. As for punch for no defense, newcomer Juan Beniquez, he has caught everything in sight. My letter to you, like your scouting report, may become outdated, but right now as Texas is out in front and old Rusty and the two foolish bets are leading the way. Pete Morris, Arlington, Texas. And then the editor writes back, see page 18.
Yeah. And shut up. All right, well, I'm not going to reenact it the way Bill did. It was just too good. All right, I'm not going to try and top it. But I will say that I have two guys that are upset. So it's not a grumpy old man, it's grumpy old men. And it's Andy Holden and Jim Teese from New Haven, Connecticut. And they write, Larry Keith must be a Phillies fan. His article was grossly biased in favor of Mike Schmidt and grossly unfair to Met. That's a grossly for both Andy and Jim Teese. Yes. I want to throw in there. They both use the word grossly. Grossly unfair to Mets super slugger Dave Kingman, while suggesting that Kingman alter his "please help me, I'm falling" batting style. Keith praises Schmidt, who at least has a thorough knowledge of the strike zone, end quote. Not only does Keith chastise Kingman for being, quote, acutely sensitive to criticism, but he also slips in that Schmidt is a, quote, better all-around player who presents a more classic figure at the plate. A lot of air quotes in this one. We wouldn't be at all surprised if Keith drinks Schmidt's of Philadelphia beer. Damn. That's Andy Holden and Jim Teese, who really thought Dave Kingman deserved the same kind of publicity as Mike Schmidt. And 50 years back, you look at this and you go, well, you both were wrong.
I could feel your anger, Scott. I could feel you getting angrier the more you read this.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I read it a few times last night just to kind of prep myself up.
Yes.
And by now, I hate Mike Schmidt.
Yes. And you love Dave Kingman.
Just through their words.
Yes. I can feel that. F. Mike Schmidt.
From one Philadelphia icon, Mike Schmidt, to another, Dr. J. Julius Erving, the 1976 May 17th issue with Erving dominating the NBA Finals, showing why he's the doctor. Talked about Reggie Leach, Björn Borg, Guillermo Vilas, Randy Jones throwing 73-mile-per-hour heaters. Sally Little wins on a miracle bunker shot. Big thank you always to you two, Bill and Mark Hoffman, Bill Mahoney. Another great show. For all you listening, I'm Scott Johnston, and we are, who are we, Mark?
Past our prime.
All right, you're not going to be a voice actor.
Wait a second. Past our prime.